I don't know what you're going to ask, but let's.
Laura MacDonald, how are you today?
I'm pretty fantastic today.
I don't know what you're going to ask. How's your day going?
So far, so good.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's been a
Right
good
on.
day.
What's new?
Oh my gosh, everything's new.
Yeah. Super busy,
Crazy life.
right?
Just having a really crazy life
Right. In a big way,
in a
right?
really, really big way. Like everything over the last year has changed.
Yeah.
Everything. It's great.
Cycles, right? Cycles and seasons.
Yes, I love that. I love the
Cycles?
whole cycle thing.
Okay, so yeah, let's drop in. Start the cycle.
Yeah.
Is it fair to
Start the
call
cycle.
you Miss Start the Cycle or Mrs. Start the Cycle?
I don't, yeah, I think most people would probably say that's okay. For me, I don't feel that way. I feel like I've kind of given birth to it. Like maybe
Yeah.
I'm the mother of it,
Okay.
but that doesn't really belong to me. Kind of like your children don't belong to
Yeah.
you. Like,
Interesting.
like they kind of come through you
Right.
and you guide them and you teach them and you hope that you've put them on the right path. And when you find they're not on the right path, you move them
And
over.
you have how many kids, Laura?
Biological, I have two.
Yeah.
Start the Cycle Kids, probably 150.
150 have come through the program. It's a completely
Yeah.
nonprofit.
Yep.
We've got a trailer. We've
Yeah.
got a fleet of brand new Trek bikes.
Yeah, they're beautiful.
We ride the Order Shore. What am I missing? Everything in between.
All the practice rides,
Yeah.
all the background stuff. It's pretty amazing, all the stuff that gets done behind the scenes that nobody really knows about. But the fundraising,
It's becoming more known.
yeah.
It really is. When you say Start the Cycle, now people in the community, they know and they have some understanding.
Yeah, finally.
Yeah.
In advertising, they tell you have to say it, then you have to repeat it, and then you have to say it again. And on the third time, maybe the people hear it.
Yeah.
We're in year 7, and so we're repeating it again. And
Year
again.
7. But it hasn't been an advertising thing.
Right.
I suppose for like fundraising and things like that, it helps a lot, like tremendously.
Yeah.
So, what was your mission with that this year?
This year was probably, we've hit a stride this year. We know what we're doing. But, in the beginning, we didn't advertise it because the kids being kind of at risk kids, it was the underbelly of juvenile probation court and kids that were in foster and things like that. And we don't always want to advertise where the kids came from.
Sure.
But then as it grew and we started telling the story, we found like people really want to know and they really want to help.
Right. And we begin to see the similarities between all kids,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Through a program like this, you see that, a lot of the struggle, a lot of the anxiety, a lot of the depression, it roots from some of the same things, just more different levels,
Absolutely.
different levels of it.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I think everybody, I've always said, like, how do you define an at-risk kid? And it's like, I think every human is at risk.
Right.
We're like one diagnosis or one heart attack or one car accident away from being really vulnerable every day.
Delicate.
Very
We're
delicate.
so fragile, and we like to prop ourselves up, feel real strong about what we got going on.
Yeah.
That's something.
Yeah. But I find kind of in the vulnerability is where the strength is. When you can say, I don't know what I'm doing, but I know who I can ask, or, boy, that really hurt. I think that's where the good stuff is.
Yeah. And to get back up and do it
Yeah.
again and again and
Yeah.
again.
And for kids to understand that, like, adults have gotten through it and through it and through it, and we're not, perfect. I've made my mistakes. Most of our mentors will say, "Boy, I was that kid when I was
Yeah.
young."
Yeah.
There isn't anybody that's like, "Oh, I was never one of those kids."
Right? Right. I feel that way.
Yeah.
I feel that way. That's really a lot of the reason that I really feel close to the program and close age-wise with these kids. And it wasn't too long ago that I was in their shoes,
Yeah.
right? 8 years ago, I was 16.
Yep.
So it's a testament to progress
Yeah.
and potential.
Well, and I saw what happened to my own kids. My daughter has attention deficit, and I saw how, they would put her out in the hallway or punish her, or
Yeah.
she's the nicest, sweetest kid and like didn't turn in her homework, so now she's in the hallway and you're like, wait a minute, like she needs help with her homework.
Yeah.
Obviously, she's making a cry out for help, and you put her in the hallway and you make her feel ashamed and embarrassed and
Yeah.
all those other things. And so I carried that over into how do we help other kids not have to go through that?
Sure.
And how do we give them words to say, no, I'm not going in the hallway. I want you to help me with my math.
Wow. That's powerful,
Yeah.
right? That's being sovereign,
Yeah. And,
right?
she would stand up to teachers and just say, I'm not going in the hallway.
I'm here to learn.
Yeah.
I don't understand. I was distracted,
Yeah. Yeah. Your classroom is too distracting.
right? And also to give them an outlet,
Yeah. Oh,
right? An outlet for it because kids, they have that energy, that fire, you know what I
yeah.
mean? They get hyped up without coffee and they're ready to go. They're ready to go more,
Without even breakfast, they get
more,
all hyper and ready to
more,
go.
right?
Yeah.
It's the craziest thing. And
Yeah.
so to give them a healthy outlet where, oh, that's invited. Like, let's see how far we can push this,
Yeah.
right? They need that.
And to be able to talk, like my daughter would talk nonstop and it'd drive me absolutely crazy. But the neighbor loved talking to her because the neighbor never got to talk to anybody. So, like, making that connection where she'd go over and talk to the neighbor and the neighbor loved it and Maddie loved it and Maddie'd come home like happy and I'd be like, oh, thank
Right.
God.
Right.
Because you have a million things going on as a parent.
Right.
And so thankful for the neighbor who was willing to,
Yeah. And
you
you
know,
never know what that's doing for other people. Like when you have an interaction with somebody, it could be simple as saying hello to somebody and they could have been having the worst
yeah.
day. And that just totally, you know what? People aren't so bad. Maybe not everyone's trying to out to get me,
Well, and the
you know?
media sure wants us to believe it. Everything is so fear-based. We don't have television in our home. We don't have
Yeah.
cable. We don't watch the news because just of the influence that it has on us.
It
So
really does feel that way.
and the farther I get away from it, we haven't had, public broadcasting, television and things in about probably 5 years. And then when you do see it, and I mean, even the sports
What
newscasters or
about the commercials
all of it,
for candy, soda, and beer?
it's just overwhelming, all of
Whoa.
it. And everybody's yelling. In our normal life, we don't talk like that, but boy, on the commercial, everything's just fantastic, and it's overload.
It is. It's senses overload, but we get desensitized to that.
Oh,
Because we
absolutely.
adapt. Our human body is so adaptable. Our
Yeah.
mind is so morphing at all times
Yeah.
that it gets used to that and now finds it comforting.
And it ends up normal. Oh, I know a lot of people that are uncomfortable when I tell them I don't have television. A lot, because I'm a hairdresser by trade. So I
Yeah.
have like, I don't know, 300 clients or something. And most of them know I don't have television. But there's just these select few that when I tell them I don't have it, they want to tell me about it.
Oh.
Like, oh, well, you should have saw on the news today. And it's like, no, I choose not to have that. Like,
Yeah.
I
That's
don't,
cool.
I don't want that input
That's cool.
because it overloads you.
Right. I relate to that. I relate to that. I shut the Wi-Fi off when I do these podcasts. Like all the EMF thing that's coming around, I think there is some truth to it.
Yeah.
I don't know the research. I didn't look into the literature, but it seems like there's something there.
And when you are turned off to it, when you aren't being overloaded, you can feel that sensory. You can feel that
Yeah.
the electrical through you, which sounds kind of weird, but like the vibration is different when you have all that
Oh
stimulus coming
geez,
in.
talking about vibrations.
I know.
I'm triggered.
Seriously,
Energy.
energy.
It's for real.
Yeah.
It's as real as you make it, right?
Everything's as real as you make it.
Exactly. It's as real as you make it. So it has as much power as you give it,
Yes.
right? And
Everything.
it's the same as media. If you give that power, boom,
Yeah.
it's really makes a difference.
Yeah. And to slow down and take a look at who's gaining from that. It feeds into the corporate world, all those things. There's
Right.
just so much that,
Yeah. And more people are starting to wake up to that. It's really cool to see that, we're not so alone after all.
Yeah. Because I think we've all known it, but the generation right now, especially, it was so easy to put a kid in front of a television and have them watch, The Little Mermaid for 2 hours while
Oh,
I did
yeah,
dishes, or,
right.
you know, and we're waking up to that fact that, ooh, boy,
Made a difference,
it did.
you know, for better, for worse. Who's to decide? But I was one of those kids, right? I was. Love my parents to death. They're amazing people. They're amazing parents. They raised me with all the love in their heart. But I did watch TV. I did
Oh,
watch SpongeBob. I did watch a lot of movies. Like we were gonna have a Friday night pizza night with a movie,
yeah.
right? And
It was
that
supposed to be a treat,
it
right?
was a treat. I look forward to Fridays because of that as a kid. And then I look back, and now I would never want to do that. Like
That's just,
in my normal life,
yeah.
like nowadays,
And it
I would
doesn't feel
never
like a treat.
choose. I wouldn't. No, I would not feel. I would not feel on point the next morning when I'm trying to live my best. My best life.
Yeah.
People say that lightly.
Ooh, defining best life. How about that one? Yeah.
Optimal. I like the word optimal. I'm a big fan of that word.
Yeah.
It's a descriptor that really kind of hits the nail on the head. Looking for optimal performance here.
Yeah. Well, and I think generations before us, they had to. You had to be a really good hunter because that was your food. You had to be a really good gardener because you had to put up food for the winter or you wouldn't make it through the winter, especially
Efficiency, yeah.
especially around here. You had to be able to fish and preserve and all of those things. And our generation isn't doing that.
No, no, we rely much less on others to get our goods and services provided. We're much more self-sufficient, but that can become lonely very quickly.
Yeah.
Right? When I mean, I don't live with my mom and dad. I live in a apartment by myself. I work by myself. I don't go, to work with a bunch of. I have clients, but I don't have regular peeps.
Yeah.
I could be completely away from. I could work on my computer, right, and be completely away and hidden. Like this is options now,
Yeah.
right? Whereas before, I would need to find out where am I getting my food from? I'm gonna have to go talk to somebody,
Yeah.
right? Where am I gonna get the supplies I need to do what I do? I'm gonna go have to talk to somebody. I can't just order it on Amazon and
And
have
have
it
it.
shipped to the house,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And as convenient as those things are getting to be, picking up at Walmart, those kinds of things, very convenient.
Yeah.
You know,
You can be alone all day.
you could easily be alone and not have contact with other humans, which I think is desocializing us a bit.
And you see that a lot in the younger people with the phone. And a lot of people point
Yeah.
the finger at the phone. It can be a tool, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's doing amazing things. I was just talking to a woman the other day who works for the UN and for UNICEF, and she travels overseas. And she said in Bolivia, the cell phone has changed women's lives because they now are safer and they're cleaner. They're able to learn more. I mean, they just weren't educated about feminine hygiene
Feminine hygiene.
or birth control. I mean, so many things they didn't even know existed, and it's changing exponentially so much faster than we've ever seen before. It's changing generations of
Right.
people in those underserved countries.
Right. And so many people get down on it. Like, oh, it's the phones these days, kids these days.
Oh,
Just like throwing the blame out there.
and here's where I'm at with that. Okay, so we look at the 12-year-old kid who's addicted to his phone. But then we have to look at the 30-year-old mom who gave it to him, right? The 35-year-old mom who gave it to him. But then we have to take a look at her mom.
Wow.
And if we aren't looking at those generations back, right? So, and it's not only the phone, it's how you care for kids. Do you put your kid in front of the television? Did your mother put you in front of the television? So it's your normal, right?
Yeah.
But if we get back to my generation, like that 50 to 60-year-old women, we're the first generation that worked out of the home full time. I mean, I took 4 weeks off when my daughter was born
Yeah.
and went right back to work.
In the 50s, you're talking.
No, I'm talking being 50 years old.
So in the 80s.
This was like, yeah, the mid 80s, early 90s was when my
90s.
kids were born.
Yeah.
And, I was told I had to make as much money as my husband did. I have to work as hard as he did. My kids were in daycare. We had to pay for daycare. I mean, I didn't have ever on the plate an option of staying home. Never. So If my kids got mac and cheese for dinner, and I remember a daycare worker saying, it's okay if you give your kids mac and cheese for dinner because by law, the daycare has to feed them a well-rounded meal.
Wow.
So it flipped. So
Yeah.
now I have to look at if my daughter's only eating mac and cheese and ramen noodles, what did I do?
Right.
I can't just say, Maddie, that's awful stuff. Don't eat that.
Right.
I put it on her plate. And,
Years ago,
you know,
it becomes a thing.
yeah,
Right. In those moments you share with each other, that's where like the learning really takes place, even if it's subtle.
yeah,
Even if it's a subtle habit that you pick up on.
yeah.
Right.
So teaching them different, teaching them healthy breathing and
Yeah.
better eating. And
What a concept.
yeah,
Right. And to go back one more generation in the 50s, that's kind of where my mind went right away, is like, the mother lived in home and took care of the children and took care of the homestead. Go back another 50 years, another generation of kids. Now you have the entire family on the homestead running the business and running the home.
yeah. And
And the
people had,
kids were
and
working.
we're working. Yes.
1900, working.
Oh gosh, it was such a different time.
Wow. Right?
Such a
And then you
different time.
notice the people who grow up who are 80 years old now, and they worked.
Yeah.
And you feel that.
Yeah.
You feel that they have that in their bones.
Yeah. It was survival.
Yeah.
And we have it, we should be having it still because the survival now is making a better choice. Like, you go to the grocery store, what are you going to buy? It's still survival because if you're not making good choices, your health is going to suffer,
It
right?
really is, yeah.
So you're not doing what's best for you survival wise. Like you're going to die probably a
Right.
younger age if you,
Yeah. There's just a medium
yeah.
now, and that's the currency, the money is now the medium.
Well, and 100 years ago,
That
they would have been
changed-
bartering.
They changed the dynamics
Yeah.
of the survival.
Yep. And it always has. I don't think it's just this generation because we can take a look back at, somebody said, oh, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. Look at all these kids, oh. And I'm like, gosh, I think we're in the greatest time ever. Look at what we can do
Right.
medically. Look at the health we have, the food,
Right.
better than ever. But
It's a choice.
it's a choice.
What a beautiful choice it is.
Yeah.
Beautiful opportunity to choose.
It's the most important part. To create. Choosing is creating, creating what you want your life to look like.
We went down a little bit of a tangent. I'd like to talk
Yeah.
about Marquette. I really would. Because Marquette is so special.
Yeah.
And we're talking about 100 years ago. I want to kind of start with a timeline of where Marquette really started with the French and the Indians. And I just said Indians. Native Americans.
Yeah.
How that interaction unfolded.
That part of the Marquette history, the earliest stuff, Peter White coming to Marquette, meeting with Chief Kabagum, on
I know nothing of this.
Oh gosh, so and that was like mid 1800s when Marquette was just kind of getting its feet under it, and a lot of people kind of forget that Marquette and Negaunee started with mining. Negaunee was 1844 when the mining first started, and Marquette really exploded
Yeah.
after Negaunee and Ishpeming started with the iron ore mining.
Yeah.
It started becoming a port town. It started, that's when
So the West End came first.
Yes, because the minerals were here.
Right. But the first church.
Marquette is still where the first homesteads were. But as soon as
Oh.
the Indians, I said Indians, when
contagious,
Margie Gessick, who brought, was an Indian guide at the time, or a Native American guide at the time, brought, Houghton and some of the early settlers of Negaunee up to Negaunee and said, look at these areas where the metals are, and the compasses, the magnetic north compasses were going crazy. Like, what is going on in the ground right here?
Whoa.
The magnetic pull was to that iron ore. Right in Negaunee at
So
Irontown
this is
Park,
when they
Miners
first
Park.
showed up.
Yeah.
Is when, so settlers came up from Lower Michigan.
Yep.
I assume. They came up via boat, made it to the UP, made their way across.
Yeah, and the word spread quickly because remembering at that time, like, we didn't have the steel industry yet. We didn't have the
timber.
We didn't have a lot of that in the UP yet. And so the beginners, like John Longyear, who was a land looker and surveyor who got
Yeah.
here in like 1867, I think,
Okay.
he was sent up here from Lansing as a young land looker in his early 20s, could walk, he was healthy, and was looking for certain properties about the land. It turns out when there's iron ore, there's certain kinds of trees that grow and there's certain kinds of vegetation
Sure.
around. And so he was hired by a company out of Boston. Frederick Ayer hired him to come to Marquette and look around and see what he could find. And in his earliest books, John Longyear, a land looker written by John Longyear, he's saying, wow, wow, the timber, the landscape, the dead river. And, you know, it's, he, in his own book, he's saying he was walking 40 miles a day. The Native American guides didn't even like to walk with him because he was just tenacious about walking.
In a wonderland.
And think about like the only thing they had was wagon roads, like two tote roads, two tracks.
The Native Americans,
Well, they had
they had even less.
basically between Lac La Belle down by Waters Meet and Lance, which would have been their walking path, and
Okay.
then they would have had between Lance and kind of Skaney Big Bay area,
Okay.
because that was all on the shoreline. They could paddle it, they could hike it.
Oh, they could use the river to
They could use
travel.
the rivers to travel. So
Whoa.
the earliest settlements were Native Americans who were kind of picking like, ooh, the fishing here is really good.
I see. And they survived in the winter.
Yeah.
That blows my mind.
And a lot of migrating happened at that time. You know, they wouldn't stay here all winter. They'd move south and maybe only just to Menominee. I mean, Menominee was a lot warmer.
Yeah,
It was on Lake
less-
Michigan, a
yeah.
lot less snow.
Less snow. And that's interesting because, you know, if you're going to survive, it's actually easier to do in a colder climate if you have time to build a shelter
Yeah.
and host a fire. If you don't have time to host a fire, then it's not advisable.
Yeah.
But when you live in a hot climate and try to survive in it,
Yeah.
you need so much more water, so much more resources to survive that a colder climate, you know,
It's easier to survive.
yeah, it's more conducive.
You know, and, at that time, you know, if we look at what was happening out on the East Coast, you know, New York was developing at the time, Boston was developing, Chicago was becoming
Right.
really
This was still kind of
the
gangs
Great
in New
Lake.
York,
Oh,
right?
gosh, it
that
was
that time
incredible.
period with the immigrants kind of just like bombarding the land and the country
and homesteading. You know, the government was giving away big blocks of land if you
Right.
were willing to have apple trees and you were willing to homestead. They were
Right.
giving away huge blocks of property.
yeah, and there's a massive amount of chaos and like pioneering was going on. I can't imagine being a pioneer ever since I seen that Revenant movie. I was just, I was like blown away that that
amazing.
happened here.
You know, and then you get to the UP and there was no Mackinac Bridge. So they got to, you know, up in northern Michigan and kind of went northern lower Michigan and went, oh, we can't even get across there.
Not much, yeah.
You know, so the UP was really underdeveloped until late 1880s. John Longyear in like 1890s really made it explode, and then he took over a lot of the mining.
The mining was
the
in
area.
1900, like booming.
No, it was less. It was before that. It was like late 1880s was when they
1880s.
really the bigger ore docks were put in. You know, the one out by Presque Isle was put in 1910, I think, or 1912, something like that. So, and industry was changing.
This industry built America.
Oh my gosh. You know, and I talk a lot about John Longyear because he's kind of my favorite local guy, local hero. He was young, he was strong, and he did it all by himself. He was out there walking around, and he started these land contracts with his partner Frederick Ayer. And he'd go out and he'd look and he'd report back, you know, and they're writing. They're not calling each other. They're writing and saying,
Writing letters.
I've found this much property. And he would say, this has this, this does not. And what he started doing is collecting property through Ayer. Ayer would write these contracts that if John Longyear would purchase X amount, he'd give him X amount of that land.
Sure.
So John Longyear just starts collecting land and collecting land. And together they started these mining companies, and I just love their contracts that they were writing because everybody was mining everywhere. And we're not talking like Empire mine size. We're talking pickaxes, wheelbarrows, carts to get
Right.
it down to Marquette. So he's buying into these mining, he's buying the land. And then people who want to mine, he's leasing it to them, writing great leases with them, and then saying, I just want 1% of the profit. 1%. But instead of taking 100% of it, because he didn't want to be a miner, he was just saying, just 1%. But then there were thousands of them. And everybody's mining something different.
Right.
So some maybe did okay and some really didn't do okay. But he was just asking for 1%. So everybody said yes. But then as it exploded, he got over by Ironwood in the Pinocchio Range over
The
there.
west.
And it went crazy. And then he got into Hibbing, Minnesota and Duluth and got into all of that Mesabi Iron Range.
Right, because it's all just a big like strip.
It's all the same minerals that followed all of the Great Lake, all of
Right.
Lake Superior,
It's
all the way around.
large masses of movement.
Yeah. So here's a mind-boggling statistic. We're 4 generations out from John Longyear. I'm good friends with John Case, who is John Longyear's great-great-grandson. And he wrote a book called The Longyear Legacy. And he talks about how the money kind of filtered down through the family. Because John Longyear had his children, and then they had children, and then they had children. So to this day, my husband, who used to be a ship captain on the Stuart J. Court, would haul 63,000 tons of ore every week. 63,000 tons. The Longyear family gets 1% of that contract.
To this day.
Of every ton. 1% of every ton. And I think about that money, and John Case in his book, and also when we've talked, has said absolutely the royalties come quarterly to us great-great-grandchildren.
Wow.
So talk about great contracts that John Longyear was writing back then.
Business.
And he was in with everybody. So most of the local people will know him because of the Huron Mountain Club.
Oh.
He started the Huron Mountain Club with Horatio Seymour and Peter White and a couple of other friends. And they wanted to do this hunting and fishing sportsman club. And they were going to get 100 members. And then they had some really bad winters and some summers. And I can't even imagine what the bugs were like.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
These wilderness areas. And
Without bug repellent.
oh, I know.
Right.
And they started soliciting, because John Longyear was still connected to Boston through Frederick Ayer. And so he was writing to people like Campbell and Firestone and Edison and, all these names that we know
The
now.
big names.
Armour. Yeah. Come hunting and fishing up here.
Wow.
And they all came. And, to them, paying whatever it costs to be a member was really nothing, even if they got here once a year. And it grew and it grew, and he saved all of that acres. It's like 300,000 acres or something at the time. And, the Huron Mountain Club is some of the most pristine, preserved.
Miraculous.
In the 1930s, they brought in Aldo Leopold to write, in the 1930s, to kind of write like where they should let people walk and not let people walk, and how to save the dune grass and how to.
Yeah.
And so locally, a lot of our conservation is based on what they've done at the Huron Mountain Club and the research center there. The old stone house, John Longyear's summer cottage on Ives Lake, is now a U of M research center, or Michigan State Research Center. And researchers come and they're studying things that they've never even been able to see anywhere else because it's so preserved.
Yeah. And why was Henry Ford so pissed off? This whole thing.
Well, this is an interesting concept as well, because Henry Ford wasn't actually even a member.
Right.
Until like in the 1930s.
Oh.
Late 1920s. And John Longyear had already died in 1922.
Okay.
So a lot of people say, oh, Longyear didn't like,
Yeah.
Edison didn't like, and Ford didn't like. But it's easy when we're 100 years out telling those stories and saying, well, you know what I heard.
Yeah, right.
There's a lot of those kind of folklore. Same thing with Granite Loma. The rumor was, John Longyear didn't like the Jewish people, and so he wouldn't let them join the Huron Mountain Club, and that's why
they built Granite Loma.
That's why they built Granite Loma. Absolutely not the truth.
Okay. What's the truth?
Well, there again, John Longyear died in 1922, and Granite Loma wasn't built until 1923.
Gotcha.
So you kind of, the truth was John Longyear and Nathan Kaufman had kind of had opposing banks in Marquette.
Kaufman?
Kaufman. they had opposing banks. There were three Kaufmans that were really important in Marquette history: Louis Kaufman, Samuel Kaufman, and Nathan Kaufman. And John Longyear, in his memoirs, he wrote after when he was in his 70s, he writes these memoirs, this reminiscences, and he writes, "I did not like Nathan Kaufman, nor did many." And so I think it was kind of a personal pissing match for
Oh,
I think they just had opposing banks. But I have this ability to kind of think about that time frame.
yeah,
Remembering corporations didn't come around until 1913. So fortunes really weren't secured. Like you could make a whole fortune and lose it in a day back then.
yeah.
And
Because the
the
investments
Oh, and the
weren't
stock
there,
market and
right?
people were writing up stocks and they were fake. And I mean, a lot of bamboozling going on. A lot of the rules were way different back then. They didn't have the FDIC to secure their money, and
Yeah,
they didn't have banks like we have nowadays.
yeah,
So, and we all heard about the depression of the 1930s and 40s. There were depressions and financial panics long before that.
sure.
Long before
That's
that.
always,
So, a lot of these wealthy people, Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, they were accumulating and accumulating and accumulating wealth because they were afraid they could lose it all tomorrow. And it was quite possible they could.
wow.
So, and
Right.
Carnegie and,
The
but
big names, right? These are national names, but the names that you're saying right now are like names of theaters in Rhodes, in Marquette.
yeah,
The names of the big dingers
and they were all
of a
here.
hundred years ago.
They were all here because of John Longyear.
Hmm.
Every single one of them. Frederick Olmsted did the landscaping for the Longyear Mansion when it was in Marquette. Frederick Law Olmsted is the, architect of 1,100 national parks and
Yeah,
Central Park and
yeah,
the Emerald Necklace in Boston and all of, Grant Park and all of the 1893 World Fair in Chicago. I mean, it was just, Frederick
yeah,
Law Olmsted was amazing, and he was in Marquette doing the landscaping for John Longyear's home.
yeah. Because right now we are set up in Marquette for a massive expansion of the downtown area. I mean, we see it happening,
Yeah.
and it seems almost by design.
I think Marquette has always been this gem that the past always said, oh, you can't make it there. It's too rough, it's too cold, they don't have the infrastructure. I think Marquette over the last probably 20 years has really invested in that infrastructure and said, we're going to use our shoreline in a smarter way. You know, we're going to use winter a different way. Look at how fat tire biking has expanded what we're doing in Marquette in the winter.
Yeah, it's not just the hardcore skiing
Right.
or skiers anymore. That's true. I mean,
And the ice climbing festival in
ice
Munising,
climbing is really
like
cool.
1,100 people registered for the ice climbing in Munising this year.
Or even the indoor activities that we didn't have access to five,
Yeah,
10 years ago,
yeah, the
right?
training facilities
Right?
and
Training facilities, exercise, martial arts,
yeah,
yoga,
yeah.
right? The more somber disciplines, the more indoor based disciplines are being brought about in this area as they were in major cities, and it's working.
And I think we're seeing Marquette kind of come on in that quiet sports, so to speak. The biking, hiking, paddling,
The
rowing,
solo stuff in a
uh,
big way.
the solo stuff, the getting back to self
Hmm.
stuff.
Self exploration.
It's a great place to do it. I mean, I can't think of a better place to meditate than on the top of a hill with a lot of trees.
Yeah. To explore like true nature
Yeah.
of everything or you like your essence or the essence of now. I think presence is a great word for that. Just to bring some presence into your awareness,
Yeah.
right?
And that's not necessarily a new thing nationally. So if we go back to that same era, 1890s, when John Longyear is building his mansion in Marquette, Vanderbilt, Cornelius Vanderbilt and George Vanderbilt, years later, were building all of Asheville, North Carolina, and the Biltmore Estates.
Yeah.
And they bought up, 110,000 acres of the Pisgah Forest, which is it's
Beautiful.
absolutely
The
stunning.
Pisgah National Park with Looking Glass Falls, Sliding Rock, and
And
some of those pinnacle. Yeah, oh my
all of
gosh.
that was owned by Vanderbilt, who, was transportation in America. He started out on the water and ended up being railroads. But the reason he bought that area in Asheville, North Carolina, was because he and his wife were living on Fifth Avenue in New York. Now imagine late 1800s in New York, no sewage system, no garbage disposal. They're selling or they're burning coal. They have raw oil, they're using kerosene, they're using no cars yet.
Whew.
Can you imagine what that city smelled
Smog,
like?
the smog,
And
and the
horses.
air, and the animals, and the heat. In the heat?
And so in the summer, they
Whew.
would move down to Asheville, North Carolina for fresh air. They were
Wow.
going there for their health. And if a lot of what you read historically about Marquette in this area, um, Blaney Park was a resort area where people would come up from downstate and they could breathe there. Blaney Park had an airport. It had an indoor ground or an underground pool in the 1920s and 30s.
What?
It had a golf course and it was a railroad stop.
No shit.
So people would come to Blaney Park to rest and have fresh air.
In Germ Fast, right?
Yeah, and germ
Right by
fest.
Germ
And we're
Fast.
also talking about a time when there was TB
The Seamy
and there was
Stretch.
polio and there was all these other things that we didn't have vaccinations for yet. So people were going to those areas.
Yeah.
You had to have a clean bill of health
They're
to be able to.
epidemics.
It,
They're
so,
epidemics.
yeah, in order to get into some of those resort areas, you had to have a clean bill of health from your doctor to be able to get into them because they were health resorts basically to stay healthy.
Whoa.
And I think Marquette has always been that. There was probably about 3 miles from here, there was a TB hospital out on County Road 492. And it was taking those people that had TB and putting them there so that they wouldn't affect everybody else in the community.
Sure.
So to be in Marquette for fresh air and for health and for self-reflecting,
Yeah.
the lake, that lake,
Well, human beings are drawn to horizon lines.
yeah.
That's a
And where do we
biological,
get to see?
right? That's biological. When we see a blue horizon line, there's endorphins and hormones of being alive get released,
Oh,
right? Dopamine or serotonin. I don't know the technical
all of them.
names. All of them.
All of them. All
All
the
of
good
them.
ones.
Yeah. Right.
All the
It's
ones,
that's what
all
the
the ones we're all
horizon.
seeking.
Yeah, the horizon does that for us in a small way. The more we tap into it, the more we can feel its effect.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but there's something about the lake too. It is the biggest lake in the world. It's the deepest lake in the world. The Edmund Fitzgerald got sunk by that lake. There's some,
Oh, such a story.
yeah. What is your take on all that?
Now, remembering that my husband was a ship captain, okay?
Yes.
There's that whole Edmund Fitzgerald song, if they would have known about the storm, if they. The other side of it, at that time in history, going back, in the early 70s, captains were paid a bonus for delivering tonnage
Uh-huh.
and as fast as you could send it.
Uh-huh.
So among the maritime believers, there's kind of this feeling of that captain took a chance, that he was going after the money. They don't do it anymore because it's not safe.
Damn. He rolled the dice.
He rolled the dice, it sounds like, in a really, really tough area. And he was a seasoned veteran, captain.
That's what they
So,
say in the song.
so he was kind of, he should have known better. But at the same time, he had been through other storms.
Mm-hmm.
He may have thought, if I get around Whitefish Point, I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
And, we all know it from the song. It was only
What,
15
15?
more miles he would have been there. But,
How big were the waves?
I don't know. I'm
40?
not sure. Yeah.
25?
And you look at.
To sink a freighter.
Yeah,
I mean,
to
you see
sink a
those things
freighter.
harbored. A 50
Yeah.
feet wave.
Yeah. There's, and it gets really wicked out there. I've
Uh-huh.
been with my husband on I've taken freighter trips on 1,000 footers in good weather. And there were times when, the wind was not even really blowing and you could just hear it smacking up against the boat. And I'm like, wow. But I can't imagine what that storm would have been like for them. And I don't want to say that it wasn't only his fault, but there were so many other factors we don't take into account. Like,
Yeah.
you know, maybe as wheelsman said, we got this,
Yeah, you
you,
never
you just don't
know.
know.
Nobody
We
was
weren't
there.
there. We weren't
Nobody
there.
was there to tell the
Yeah.
tale,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and nowadays that just wouldn't even be possible. Lots of people say, always asked, were you worried when Mac was out there sailing? And no, because he has better radar than most weather stations.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, the boats report back to NOAA's weather stations and say what the weather report is out there. That's how if you ever look on boatnerd.com has this AIS map where you can look and you can tell where every single freighter on the Great Lakes is.
Dang.
And it's because they send in a weather report and then it
Oh
pins them
man.
where they
What
are.
about the Sioux?
Oh yeah, you can see everything going up and down the
Because the
Sioux.
Sioux is our gateway to Canada or
All of it,
downstate. Is that how we get things
yeah, that's how
downstate?
you get things done. So from Lake Superior,
Through
you
the
have to
Sioux.
go through Sault Ste. Marie to get to any of the
Lake
other Great
Huron?
Lakes.
Right
Huron,
into Huron?
Michigan, all of them.
Oh,
And they
really?
all kind of connect right there.
Wow. That's so
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, it's a
And that's the bridge to Canada.
and the
If
Great Lakes. Like
amazing.
when I look at where we get to live,
That's what they call them, the Great Lakes.
they're
Something
pretty
else,
fantastic.
right? And yeah, and I don't think, it's cool. I love how the Midwest doesn't get credit. I love it.
Oh, best kept secret.
That's a beautiful thing,
Yeah.
right? Because the Midwest is that hard nose, like blue collar mentality, willing to grind away consistently with dignity, with nobility, with
Yeah.
grit and
Grit. I
honor.
love the word grit.
Grit.
There's some, and just look at our ancestry. I mean,
Uh-huh.
whether we're talking about the Norwegians or the Finlanders or all of those people that just dug in and farmed here.
Right?
It's not even flat.
Bunch
What are
of
they
crazy
doing?
Europeans. Bunch of crazy Europeans.
Yeah. But it looked an awful lot like it did in their homeland. So they thought, they weren't
Yeah.
looking for the best land to plow. They were just looking for land to plow.
Yeah. And they could afford it.
And they could afford it. Yeah. And still, I look at Marquette, people say, oh, the housing prices have gone up. Not like some areas. We
No, we
really
don't
have
get
affordable
that.
housing. And
Yeah. And that's a big thing right now. It's like, oh, it's so expensive to live in Marquette. And what a beautiful way to start expanding that out west.
yeah.
You
Oh,
see Harvey, you see
and look at where you get to live.
Negaunee, right?
Yeah.
On the border.
This whole Negaunee Township area is, I don't want to advertise it. You don't want to come to Negaunee Township.
Right.
No, nobody does.
Nobody.
No.
It's just too nice.
And the Dead River Basin. So we're going to be connecting a little bit of the dots between Start the Cycle, John Longyear, and Land Conservancy.
Yeah, we
Within
started doing that with the trails.
within the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to be working with UP Land Conservancy
The stewardship.
and the stewardship of the land and the quiet sports and keeping that section of the Dead River just for quiet sports. We don't want to see it developed. We saw a little bit of that starting to happen down in Forestville. It's not big.
Well,
But
it's a landfill.
it's starting to be,
There's a landfill
it used
there,
to be pretty pristine, and
right?
it's starting to be developed. So the UP Land Conservancy, we're very fortunate to have them buying up some of the property.
Because Lowe's was creeping in, right? That whole complex,
Boy,
Meyer.
yeah.
Meyer is like creeping in towards the waterfalls.
Yeah,
You could ride a bike from the back parking lot of Meyer to Dead River Falls, like
Yeah.
simply.
very simply. Yeah, and I think as good stewards of the river, that river is so important. Again, I'll go back to John Longyear. He purchased all the way from Presque Isle, where the Dead River comes out by the old Presque Isle power plant there,
Yeah,
all the way up. So you'd go, through Tourist Park, through Collinsville, Forestville, McClure Basin, Hoist Basin, all the way up to the Silver Lake Basin.
Right.
And in 2011, when that flooded and it all came downward, I think Marquette really saw the power of that river. And John Longyear saw it before it was dammed up. So
Really?
his home on Ridge Street in Marquette, which now is in Brookline, Massachusetts.
They moved it.
Oh, such a great story. But I'll tell the story about the electricity first. So
So yeah, this dam, we have the Hoist Dam
yeah.
and we have the Forestville Dam, all on the same river, essentially.
Oh, there's more than that.
The Dead River Storage Basin is a creation because of
John Longyear.
the dams.
Yeah. John Longyear bought all of that tract of land, and he had his home was electric. In 1892, he put in electricity, and he had a generator at the bottom of the hill down where kind of the waterworks is.
Mm-hmm.
Peter White and a bunch of the other men of our city lived very close, and they didn't like the sound of the generator. And you can probably imagine what Marquette sounded like at night back then. I mean, there were no cars, there were no, so at night it would have been quiet.
Yeah.
And here's this generator running for John Longyear's electricity. So he created the first water generated power plant basically for his own needs so that he wouldn't have to have the generator. And then from there, because he owned
Whoa.
amazing amounts of property.
Whoa. So this developed from this guy trying to keep electricity in his home without making too much noise.
Yeah.
These dams, I mean, when you go visit these dams, they're hundreds of feet high.
Yeah. And all the way up, so Collinsville was first.
Yeah.
And then, well, Tourist Park first.
Tourist Park,
Collinsville.
Hoist.
Forestville.
Forestville's a dam.
Forestville's a dam. And then
Hoist.
McClure Basin. And then Hoist Basin. And then Silver Lake Basin.
Silver Lake. No shit.
Yeah. All the way up. So
To Ishpeming on that Coates Road, right?
in like 1999, the 100-year lease of the properties that John Longyear had leased to camp owners up on the Hoist Basin. So if you talk to the people that lived on the Hoist Basin back then, they all rented from John Longyear.
Yeah.
100-year leases, very cheap.
Yeah.
1999, that lease comes due.
Yeah.
And the Longyear descendants decide, you know what, why are we holding on to this land? Let's let the landowners buy it from us.
Yeah.
So, to this day, there's still people that lease properties all the way up that Dead River Basin. And John Longyear tells the story of how he really saw Marquette's electrical supply coming from hydro. He
Right.
wanted to sell those dams to the city.
Oh my gosh. This kind of ties everything together. And then you have the railroad, which we didn't even talk about. The
Yeah,
railroad
and
coming through.
all of it.
Right, because the Iron Ore Heritage Trail
Yeah.
was the old railroad.
Railroad grade, yes.
So that railroad grade runs from the harbor or Presque Isle,
Yep.
starts at Presque Isle and runs all the way to Ishpeming as far as I know.
Yeah, up to the mines. And it used to go farther.
Okay.
And nowadays that's all owned by the mining company. LS&I is owned by CCI. So it's dedicated to hauling iron ore.
Mm-hmm.
And used to be coal, but the coal, they don't use coal here anymore.
The
But
industry died for a little while,
yeah,
didn't it?
and I think it's going to come back, but they have to build a natural gas power plant out at the mine to get it back up and running because they're buying their energy from We Energy right now.
Yeah.
From Wisconsin. But I look at that forethought to say this could provide all the hydroelectric we could need. But there again, I'm currently in the process of researching to write a book about the moving of the Longyear Mansion.
This is fascinating that you know all this information.
And you thought I only knew bikes.
Well, no, I knew you had a few tricks up your sleeve, but I had no idea it was Marquette history
Yeah,
of all
but,
things, and it's something I've been curious about.
and John Longyear went to the city and said, we could be generating all our own electricity right here from the hydroelectric. And at the time, he was accused of wanting to be the electricity czar, like the
Yeah.
czar of electricity.
Yeah.
And so the city didn't buy it from him. And to this day, they still lease property from John Longyear's family to be able to get some of that generated energy. So it's amazing to think it's easy for us to go back and think about it now and say, well, what was happening?
Sure.
But they were in it at the time. And,
Yeah.
like I said,
Yeah.
fortunes, they were fighting for the money and they were fighting for the prestige.
Yeah. Did we
And
take this land from Native Americans? We kind of take it
I think,
over?
I think so.
Everybody was kind of doing it?
Probably. And, the government at that time was homesteading and
Yeah.
saying, we're going to give you this property.
They had federal laws to drive them out,
Yeah.
right?
And there were lots of tribes here.
Yeah.
Still are.
Yeah.
The Keweenaw and the Sioux and yeah, it hasn't always been pretty.
We're on credit.
Well, and right now, again, it's easy for us to look back and say, why did they do that? But at the time,
Yes. They were
they
doing
did what they needed to
they
do.
did what they knew
And
as
they
well.
and what they knew.
Didn't know the big picture.
Yeah.
And this is an interesting question. Knowing what you know, why is history important?
Oh. I think the standard answer to that is always so that history doesn't repeat itself.
It is. That's kind of why I asked.
But it's not. It's so that we can take a look at forgiving the generations before us for what they did.
Uh-huh.
Because, it wasn't until we know better that we do better. So, if they were killing off all the wildlife, shooting 50 deer a season,
The bison.
And-
What have you?
they couldn't go to the grocery store and buy it. So, they had to do what they had to do to survive back then and cut down all the trees. You look at old pictures and it's like they decimated all the trees to build a town. Well, they were building the town houses out of wood. They had to cut down the trees to build the houses. So did it get over lumbered in some areas? Sure it did. But can you imagine the humongous white pines? I look at how big they are now, 100 years later. Can you imagine how big the trees were here? I mean, they looked at it and went,
Like 5 people.
wow.
Right. This is just what we needed.
And they could make board feet of wood out of it at the sawmill, and they could build,
Because people were dying.
and
Right.
they needed shelter.
People didn't have the resources they needed.
Right.
And that makes sense.
Yeah. So we need history to look back at it and to say, it's easy for us to say they shouldn't have done that. Well, they did what they knew. And when we know better, we'll start to do better. I even think right now in history, the things we're doing with
It's
everything.
it's a variant of the same cycle.
Well, and we really are a pretty young species when you look at the timeline.
We're also a young country,
We're a very young country.
and you see all these different countries rise into power. You see the Han Dynasty in China, you see the Romans in Europe, you see the British Empire in the 1800s, and now you see the United States with the most powerful military of all time. And you just know everybody has their time.
Yes.
And times come and go, seasons come and go.
Yeah.
And it's not for better or for worse. It's
No,
not
it-
good or
It
bad,
just is.
but it is how it works.
Yeah. When they were dumping all of their trash into a dump and covering it over even 20 years ago,
Yeah.
it's what they knew.
Right.
They didn't think about, was this leaching into
gotta go
the
to the moon.
water? You know,
Obviously, you just take it to the moon.
In New York, they put it on barges and put it out in the ocean.
You just
So-
launch it into a rocket and leave it go out into space. If you shoot it far enough, it won't hit our satellites. It's
and
craziness.
If the garbage blows up out in space, it just burns up, right?
Well, we don't know.
We don't know. Let's
It's
do
crazy.
it.
Right. So that's next, right? It's just the same
Oh.
as burying it.
And then we
Or
think
throwing it
we
in the
think we
ocean.
know everything, and that's the point. It's like we don't.
Right. It becomes semantics
And
of the same cycle.
the things I've read say that again. One of my favorite writers is Neil Donald Walsh. He's written The Conversations with God. If you haven't had a chance to read them, they're just fantastic.
I've heard such great things about that book.
Well, there's a series of
That book
books,
especially.
1,
Conversations
2, and
with
3,
God.
and then he just put out 4, and he says, the message from God is, "You've got me all wrong." That God didn't have an individual plan for only you, and I use the word God because that's what he used. To
Right.
me, it's whatever you
Yeah.
believe is out there as the higher being.
Yeah.
It can be the universe, it can be the energy, it can be the source. There's so many words.
It can be the ultimate. It can be the everything. It could be the nothing.
Yeah. And all that, God
Yeah.
said is, I am. Just believe that I am.
Hmm.
It wasn't, I am God. Somebody gave it that name.
Right. A human.
A human gave it that name. So the essence that is has a plan for humanity
Yeah.
to have free will, that we are going to be able to experience what we want to experience, how we want to experience it,
What we need to
what we need to
experience.
experience. And, there again, we know that when we know better, we'll do better. So we don't kill each other because we know how that will feel, because we have experienced it through others' experience. I don't have to kill someone to know how that would feel for me. But generations before us didn't know that.
Hmm.
The caveman killing the man who's coming to, eat his food. He didn't. It was survival.
Hmm.
So as we evolve and we understand that we're creating our experience,
Hmm.
I think we're going to do better as we
Evolve or devolve?
both
Right?
maybe
Both at the same time, a
both
little
at
bit
the
of
same
both.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that
It's like two curves
we
overlapping.
look at that again, that era of I years ago I woke up with three numbers in my head. 3 years it ended up, but I woke up and it was very clear to me. 1896, 1938, and 1955. And it took me a lot of years to like wrap my head around what the hell are these? At first I didn't even know if they were years. I thought, are these like lotto numbers? What are these three
Yeah,
numbers?
that's fascinating.
So 1896, if you Google it, was a huge expansion explosion year. That was like the first Olympics, the first cars. Um, oh boy, there's so much. You'll have to Google it. I'm off the top of my head. I can't even
No worries.
electricity
Yeah.
was starting. All of it.
Yeah.
1896 was this huge explosion. As a matter of fact, the Wright brothers started their first bike shop in 1896. So, just this huge expansion of humanity, 1896. 1938 was a huge expansion of the whole world changed that year. Hitler came into power in Europe.
Yeah.
1938. The whole world as we knew it changed. So,
Hmm.
1896, the world as we knew it
And
changed.
America was on that upswing.
Oh,
That big upswing after the Great Depression.
yeah. We were just starting the Industrial Revolution was starting, but back up. I mean,
Yeah.
we were really grinding.
Yeah.
And then 1955 took me a while. I was like, I don't get it. I don't get it. That's the year that Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, and Oprah Winfrey were all born.
Revolutionaries.
And there are all kinds of people born in 1955. I just quote those three because I really see where those three revolutionaries have changed history forever.
Hmm.
And some might say, like, Oprah, I don't get it. Oprah brought to us an opening in our belief system
She is an African American woman in America.
who was abused,
Yeah.
who was poverty, and now,
Hello.
like, on the Fortune
An
500
emp-
list,
an empire.
an empire.
Oprah is now a
From,
TV channel. She
and,
was an African American woman.
and it
Grew up
wasn't
where?
with a commodity. She grew up in Mississippi.
Mississippi.
So
Oh
look
my gosh.
look at everybody else we've talked about today. Vanderbilt, Longyear, Carnegie, Rockefeller, Pillsbury, Campbell,
Firestone.
Oscar Mayer, Firestone, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs. They all had a commodity. They all sold something. Oil, kerosene,
Yeah.
they all sold something. Oprah has sold humanity. That's her commodity. Is kindness to everybody. And it's a commodity that we all possess,
Yeah.
and she gave it back to us.
Yeah. Objectively.
Objective. And how to treat each other.
Objectively is the key of all that because it's not under some cult.
Yeah, it's a
It's not under some umbrella with one side or the other.
and
There's
people try to make it like the religion.
mm-hmm.
Oh, you follow Oprah? that's like, it's not like being Catholic.
Correct.
Following Oprah is being human.
Correct. Now I see what you're saying. When you start to, yeah, that's why objectivity is so powerful in that circumstance.
Yeah, to understand
1955.
1955. And it's 2016 was another year that came up, like wrapping my head around, that we have modern day prophets and messiahs as well. I'm not anti-religion. I'm not anti-Bible. I'm not anti anything really.
Mm-hmm.
I only know what I know, and I know I've only been exposed to the tip of the iceberg
Right.
compared to
Yeah, a drop of water in comparison to the ocean.
absolutely.
Sure.
But what I do come to understand is that religion, organized religion, was created by humans,
Mm-hmm.
and it was created for a very good reason. It created societies and
Where would we
social
be
structure.
without it?
Absolutely. But then you start to ask, is it still necessary? It's necessary in that belonging. Some people feel that they belong. Where we don't need it is guilt and shame.
Right.
The guilt and shame
Judgment.
and judgment. And, you're not earning your way into heaven. I love the saying, going to church and sitting in the pew no more makes you a Christian than sitting in the garage makes you a car.
Right.
Like, what are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
What are you being?
You just, yeah. Is it just Sunday morning?
And, I love, or, everybody gets in their car after church and they're all honking at each other to get out of the parking lot as fast as they can. What? Or they get there early so they get the best parking spot.
Right. It's a paradox.
But I think we're seeing the tides change. I think we're seeing more
An oxymoron, rather.
people expanding into the thought that they are God or they are creator. If you believe God created you in his image or their image, and God created you, that means you're the creator because you are him or them. I get stuck in the pronouns because I was raised in the Catholic Church, so it was
Sure.
always he and him,
Rather than us.
us, and it's
Or
changing. It's the world wants to experience itself.
Through us.
Through us.
What a concept.
Yeah.
I was having a conversation. No, maybe I was listening to a podcast. They were talking about humans can't come together for an hour or more without discussing religion or politics. And I said, is that so bad? Is that so bad?
And why should, well, when I was in beauty school, which was 1984,
Did they tell you that?
we weren't allowed to talk about politics, religion, or sex.
It's taboo.
Just
It's
cannot do it.
taboo. I
Cannot
think
do
the
it.
more we embrace that as a human condition,
Yeah.
rather than some like subtopic or some section of your rigid
You have to.
box of how you believe.
Yes, but are you a Republican or a Democrat? Are you a Catholic or a Lutheran?
Let's
Are
create
you
more separation.
well,
Essentially, that's what
divide and conquer.
that idea perpetuates. Divide and conquer.
Divide and conquer. If you can get them to disagree, you can tear them apart.
And look at us today. We talk about the precipice of the United States of America. There's a good amount of separation going on.
And I would dare to ask, has there ever been a time we were together? Because we still have
No.
Chinatown.
No,
We still have,
there was not.
Greek
Because we
town.
came here and there was them and us.
Yeah.
Them and us. Yeah. The Native Americans and us.
Yeah.
Because I'm European descendants,
me
right?
too.
Ireland.
So, what do you see in the future as the unifier? What will not just Marquette, not just Michigan, not just United States. What do you see universally
Yeah.
as the thing that will help humans understand we're one?
Right. Because there's never been this of which you speak in the past.
Ever.
Technology.
Technology is going to unify? It's definitely
I see it as a potentiality. I see it as an option. I don't see it as the answer. I don't claim to know.
we're going to get the answer like in 55 more generations or something. I don't know.
or tomorrow.
Or tomorrow, we're not
Yeah,
sure.
right. So I see it as technology as a unifier, as a possibility because we have no conceptual framework to understand how advanced that it's going to get. It is going to get so out of control that humans are now living inside a device,
Yeah.
right? They're creating, you talk about being the creator.
Personalities all in their hand.
Yeah, no more language barrier. All one language, right? Instant translation,
Yeah.
right? It'll be the universal language that makes all of this understand. It will allow for translation to take place instantaneously. It will allow for people to communicate on a level that has never been experienced in human history.
And just like I was
It
saying, the women
already
in
is.
Bolivia were able to get information off the internet with their handheld devices. Imagine the oppressed areas of like, North Korea,
Right,
or
right.
when they can get out and they can see like, whoa,
It's 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 inevitable that
yeah,
they will see,
yeah,
right? And that we will see, right? We will see when they see their point of view, and our point of view will be shared, which is never possible before.
so maybe that's the one good thing about media is that we get to see international. I don't, generations before us didn't see that.
Sure, or our neighbor, right? To see our house from their perspective.
Or a drone.
Whatever, right? So it all comes full circle.
Yeah.
Technology is a tool. It's just like a hammer. You can smash yourself in the face or build an empire. Yeah, it's your choice. Again, it comes down to the beautiful choice.
That beautiful choice. That beautiful, beautiful choice.
Hmm.
So John Longyear's home, he built this gorgeous 65-room mansion out of sandstone from his private sandstone quarry at the Huron Mountain Club,
Wow.
and some from Jacobsville. And John Jacobs had a quarry in
Yeah.
kind of South Marquette down by Mare's Oats.
Yeah.
So this amazing sandstone by architect was Frederick. I'm going to forget his last name. I never forget names. Charlton. Charlton was the architect, and the contractor he hired was a guy by the name of Charles Van Eiderstein. And they wanted to know if they could even build this sandstone mansion first. So John Longyear interviews these people to come in and, hey, what would you put on this site? So just to give you an idea of the lot that he had, if you go from the waterworks in Marquette, where the waterworks building is, where the Maritime Museum is in Marquette by
Yes.
the Coast Guard. Okay. If you go to the top of the hill, the first crossing street is Cedar. So if you stand on the corner of Ridge and Cedar and you put your arms out to the north and the south, that is going to point directly at like Lower Harbor Park over here, the Fraser Shipyard. And over here, it's going to point all the way down to Picnic Rocks. And John Longyear owned all of that property,
Uh-huh. The
all of it,
lakefront.
22 acres
Damn.
right there, okay? So he has this view of Marquette from up there, and he asks, the architects to build him this sandstone house. And he interviews a couple other architects from Chicago, but he ends up, Charlton was the architect that had done the Marquette prison. And he loved how the Marquette prison's architecture looked, so he hires him. And Van Eiderstein is, cutting all the stones and ordering the Tiffany glass, and they get it all done in 1892, October 8th of 1892. And by the winter of that year, there was a huge financial panic. And because John Longyear had this wealth, lots of people were coming to his home for food. For his wife had started kind of like a kindergarten
Uh-huh.
for kids, and people were hungry, and they were coming to him, and he knew that they couldn't sustain a whole community. So he sent his family,
Okay.
his wife and his 6 children, over to Paris and put them in a flat in Paris. And he went to Ives Lake at the Huron Mountain Club, and they closed down the big house. Plus, it was very expensive to run it. the help and all the other people.
Yeah, this is a
So during
mansion.
it was huge,
Immaculate. A staff runs the house.
lots. So, modern day castle, a castle. So, his family stayed in Paris for a year, and then they went to Dresden, Germany for a year, and then it was safe to come back. But by that time, the children had already been educated in Paris
Mm-hmm.
and Dresden,
Mm-hmm.
and Mrs. Longyear was like, our kids can't stay here.
Mm-hmm.
So she got a flat at the Commonwealth in Boston, and that was essentially their home. So the home was in Marquette from 1892 until 1903, and a lot of people think they lived here during that time, but John Longyear's reminiscences says they really only spent about 18 months in the big house
Yeah, that's
between
nothing.
being in Boston and traveling, and they'd do these huge world tours. So the the railroad wants to put the railroad around the shoreline in front of John Longyear's home.
Now?
No, this was
Okay.
1903.
Okay.
1901, I think it all started.
Yeah.
But Mrs. Longyear had a plan to build a park. Their oldest son had drowned in Lake Superior in a canoeing accident in 1900, and she wanted to build a memorial park for him. They had the plans, the blueprints are at our history museum.
What was the park?
It was going to be called Howard's Park, and it was going to go from Fraser's shipyard all the way around the Coast Guard station to the lighthouse. Fountains and walking paths. It was going to be beautiful. And all on the end of prestigious, beautiful Ridge Street. The
Oh
whole
my
park, and it was going to be
gosh.
public.
Ridge and Arch.
Yeah, gorgeous. So the city said, nope, we won't let you build it. We're going to let the railroad go through right there. So the railroad was already to the lower harbor park, and they were going to run the railroad all the way along Lake Shore,
And they're
all
like,
the way out to Presque
nah,
Isle.
nah.
And John Longyear said, no, like, it's dangerous. I don't want it in my front yard. So he drew up a plan for the railroad to instead go out by where we know now as McDonald's, out that way, where the bike path goes.
McDonald's.
Where the bike path goes.
Yes, the Sioux line.
Yep,
The Sioux line that goes over 553 straight to Forestville.
and he proposed that
No
that's where it would go.
way.
And the city said no.
And that's where it breaks off from the iron ore.
Yep,
No way.
serious.
That's gnarly.
And the city said they wouldn't do it.
See, I dig this stuff.
So,
Some people might be listening, just like, oh my God, they're talking so long. But,
are we over our hour? Oh no.
oh, geez. Don't think like that.
So the city pushed it through, and while John Longyear and his family were on a trip to Europe, the city started blasting to make the railroad. And John Longyear appealed to them and appealed to them. If you ever want to read any of these documents, they're all at the Longyear Museum, the Longyear Library at
Yeah.
the History Museum in Marquette. Open to the public.
Yeah.
Say, I want to see this letter, and Beth will go and get it for you.
Beth,
Beth, the
you
librarian.
probably spent some time with
I
her
have spent a lot of time with Beth.
at the Peter White.
Nope, at the History Museum,
At the
Longyear Library.
History Museum.
History Museum upstairs is
Marquette
the.
History Museum,
yeah.
the Dome.
Yep,
The Dome in Marquette.
yeah. So
This is open information.
open for anybody. It's so cool. You should see his photographs.
There's so much to get into. We scratched the surface. Timber.
We might have to do 5 more podcasts.
You know what, Laura? I'm in.
Okay.
If you're having a good time, I'm having a good time. I'm having a good time.
Forest, lumbering, mining,
Mining.
the railroad coming through.
The
So
current industry and where the tourism,
yeah,
the biking, all of this is so key.
yeah.
And then sharing it, talking about it, mixing it up.
Well, and so much innovation happened here.
Yeah.
And people don't understand, like, someone like Frederick Law Olmsted coming to Marquette and doing the landscaping of Park Cemetery. They're like, oh, Olmsted did Park Cemetery. Does anybody, let's back up and say, why was Olmsted here? John Longyear had him landscaping his mansion.
Oh, I see.
So Olmsted was
What
here.
cemetery is that? That's
Park
the one.
Cemetery in Marquette, the really beautiful one.
7th
with the-
Street?
Yeah.
No, see, the fit strip is back there.
It's gorgeous.
Sweet.
The whole thing.
I don't think enough people know about
Landscape architect. The greatest landscape architect that ever lived. was
I
in
need to. My
Marquette.
dad was a landscape architect. I need to take him up there.
Oh, he'd know it instantly. It
Olmsted.
it looks like Central Park. It looks like
Yeah, he
Vanderbilt's,
would. He's into that.
all of it. The
He's into
Biltmore
that.
Estates. It looks exactly the same. I'd love to go with him. Invite me when you go.
I will, cause you guys. You met my mom. You met my
Yeah.
dad. You met them both.
Well, very quickly. It was graduation.
Right. It was. It was a rush.
Yeah.
I was in and out too, and there were so many kids, and Coach Connor, they run up to
It's
me. I'm like,
craziness.
"Hello, good to see you." Right?
It's craziness. But, when Longyear decided to move the mansion, he had tried selling it, and his wife said, I never want anyone else to live in that house. She was slighted by the city of Marquette. She was upset that she didn't get to build her park. And so he, off the cuff, says to Van Eiterstein, his architect or his builder, I want to build another one of these in Boston.
They dipped.
We're
They left.
they have this property in Boston. We wanna build this again in Boston. And Van Eiterstein, kind of off the cuff, says it'd be cheaper just to take it apart and move all these building materials. And John Longyear says, is that possible? Now, Charles Van Eiterstein's family photo album is in my possession. I have it. I own it. And I've gotten a little bit of history about him, and it says that he sat back and said, that's not possible, John. We can't do that. And John Longyear said, man, I love everything about this. He had hand selected the maple for the floors. He had hand selected the railings. I mean, he didn't want to
Wow.
leave this house either. And so Charles Van Eiterstein came back to him, however long later, and says, I think we can do it.
Let's do it.
So they disassembled it. Now, thinking about that time, first they had to cut the trees to build the crates to pack the stone. Okay? So they packed the stones, they number them all, and they moved them on a railroad, 150 rail cars, all the way out to Brookline, Massachusetts, 1,200 or 1,300 miles, and they rebuilt it.
They had it made. They were lucky.
Well, and
The pyramids.
there's pictures of
Right?
the cradles
Oh
and
my
all of this stuff being built in.
That was easy.
So last year I got a chance to go out to Brookline, Massachusetts, and see the mansion
That's probably a
rebuilt
dream
there.
come true.
It's private condos now, but through a matter of circumstances, which is a whole nother podcast,
Okay.
I ended up being able to go into the penthouse.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
pretty amazing to think about 100 years ago technology,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
120 years ago almost. And, nowadays we wouldn't be able to move a garden shed from over there to over there.
No.
They moved a whole sandstone mansion,
No,
1,300
this
miles.
minimalist mentality makes all that kind of seem outdated. Is not having enough stuff, being free to travel about, right? With all that you need. It's
Yeah.
interesting.
And, I love that saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a
One
time?
piece at a time, one bite
One
at
bite
a
at a
time.
time.
How did the
So,
ant eat the tiger?
one bite at a time. And how did Start the Cycle go from being just this idea in Kurt Hewitt's head of, what if we got kids on bikes?
What if?
And it took one bite of, well, where would we get bikes? And where would we ride from? And where would we store those bikes? And, it all comes from the questioning.
Yeah.
The big, powerful
Yeah.
questions of, let's talk about a question. You have a question, let's figure it out,
Yeah. Yeah. And that's how things get done.
Yeah.
Kurt was on this podcast, and I train Kurt too. So
Yeah.
we talk about that. My powerful question.
Oh,
You know,
it's
much
it was
love, Kurt
way,
Hewitt. He
way
might
before
listen.
its time.
Yeah.
Way, way before its time. John Olesnovich,
Yeah.
its life, his life work is getting humans to start questioning again,
Yeah.
because we've kind of forgotten. We were trained to look for answers. We
No,
really have to be asking those questions. And when I sit and I think about, putting myself in that era of John Longyear and like, what made him do that? It was things like he's on the top of a mountain and he sees the shadow of another mountain over there and looks at his compass and goes, well, what is that?
right. What makes us question is being out there
Yeah.
to ask the question.
Yeah. There's very little we
Coming
have
back
to
to
ask when we're
nature.
right, here. When we're in our homes and we're watching our television and we're being fed information, there's not a whole lot of questioning going on. Even if there is and we say, "Oh, who's this actress?" Click, we got it.
Right. It's when you shut the lights off and you shut off all outside stimulation and distraction, and it's quiet and it's maybe dark. Maybe you close your eyes, is when questions start to come about. How long can you deal with those questions before you start looking outside for answers?
And throughout my own lifetime, I've had to say, what's the risk in staying in a marriage you don't want to be in versus leaving? What's the effect this is going to have on your children? How much of that effect can you control?
Yeah. What's the risk at seeing a job that you hate,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And we have free will. If you don't like the job you're in, you applied for it.
Yeah.
They told you what you were going to do, and you said you'd take that job.
Right.
You don't like your shitty job, make a different choice.
Right. We don't, we get stuck with addictions, right? It's a choice.
Yep,
It really is. At the beginning.
yep.
So each choice counts.
And as we know how it's affected us,
Mm-hmm.
you know, yeah, you're addicted to sugar, you may have problems you probably will have problems down the road. Um, you're addicted to sitting and not moving.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we think addiction is only drugs and
Only
alcohol.
real hard drugs is the addiction. We're addicted to a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
Some things we need sometimes. Some things we want.
Yeah.
And usually the things that we want are the addictions.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I think the time is coming. I'm feeling a shift in all of the energy of people are yearning for more. We're understanding that we're not going to have the pensions, we're not going to have the retirements, we're not going to have the things that our generations before us had. We're not all going to belong to a union. We're not going to have things provided for us. And I think our natural instincts of survival are starting to kick back in as humans.
I dig it.
I do too.
I dig it.
I wish every single person, every single human would have the opportunity to break themselves down to that simple.
Yeah. It's cool.
Oh.
It's like it's exactly how it needs to be. And it's never been better.
Yeah, we're in a really super duper time.
Never been better. There's a lot of power to that.
Yeah, never
And
been
you and I on this podcast have barely scratched the surface. I don't see your passion going anywhere. Information, right? This is Information Operation is a podcast about local professionals and what they're passionate about. So I don't see you going anywhere.
I didn't talk about hair. I didn't talk about houses. I didn't talk about painting furniture. Got all these
We
things.
talked about the why,
Yeah.
right? The why,
The why.
right? The purpose.
The purpose of it all.
And we'll get to that.
Yeah, and
So,
keep on asking those questions. I mean, follow them.
Yeah.
Pull it like a string.
It's
Just
natural.
keep pulling it and like, what's going to happen next?
Right. It's natural. Like
Yeah.
this kind of thing is organic.
Yeah.
Whereas it can get kind of like herky jerky when different power dynamics come into play. So I strive to preserve it.
Oh, I commend you for the foresight to see it and to commit yourself to doing that.
Yeah.
Because, a lot of people just are like, oh, I just want to, go to college, get my degree and work 9 to 5 and, take my 2 weeks of vacation. I hope I get 2 weeks of vacation. And life is
We're worth more than that.
so much more.
Yeah.
So much more. So precious.
So
Yeah.
thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for
Laura.
having me.
You'rethebomb.com.
Rambling on.
Beautiful. Beautiful, Laura.
Beautiful
MacDonald.
rambling.
Until next time, guys. Ride the waves, dude.